I'm not the kind of person who looks for trouble, but trouble often finds me, especially when I'm behind the wheel of my new luxury car. Tonight didn't seem like it would be anything special, but a strange sense of unease had been with me since morning. In the rearview mirror, I noticed a patrol car that seemed to be watching my every move. Not this, I thought to myself. I knew this would happen sooner or later, that I couldn't stay unnoticed. But I still hoped it wouldn't be today. Two feelings were battling inside me: fear and excitement. Fear that everything could go wrong, and excitement at the thought that I could finally show the world that I'm not who they think I am. But more than anything, I felt irritation. Why can't they just leave me alone? Why does someone always try to put me in my place every time I take a step forward? It was infuriating beyond words. When the patrol car turned on its lights, I realized I had no choice. Adrenaline rushed to my head, and I pulled over to the side of the road. "All right, let's see what you've got," I thought, as the cop slowly got out of his car, clearly savoring the moment. His confident look spoke volumes. He was ready for something more than just checking my papers. My thoughts started to scatter. I recalled all the times people had tried to humiliate me, to crush my spirit. This cop was just another representative of a system that was used to keeping me in check. But not today. Today, I wasn't going to simply comply. This was my small revenge for all the past humiliations, for every moment I was made to feel worthless. Today, I was going to show what real karma looks like. "Good evening, officer," I said with a slight smile, feeling the tension build inside me. He came closer, and I saw his eyes scanning me from head to toe, looking for any excuse to act aggressively. His partner stayed in the car, showing little interest in what was happening. "Do you have any problems?" he asked, not taking his suspicious eyes off me. "Everything's fine," I replied, handing him my documents, just enjoying the drive. He took the documents, but his gaze returned to me, as if trying to find something that would give me away. Then he asked the question I had been expecting from the start. "Where did you get a car like this?" His voice was laced with hostility. "A gift," I answered curtly, knowing it wouldn't satisfy him. "A gift, huh?" He raised an eyebrow, skeptically. "And who's so generous?" I sighed and looked at him. He wasn't going to let me go that easily. His face showed clear contempt, and I knew he was about to try to humiliate me. "Everyone has their place in life," I said, glancing at his partner in the car. He didn't seem interested in what was happening at all. The cop didn't catch the hint and decided to assert his authority. "Step out of the car," he ordered, his voice leaving no doubt that he expected me to comply. I smiled and got out, feeling the situation slipping out of control. He grabbed my arm roughly, and everything changed in an instant. It all happened too fast. As soon as his fingers touched my arm, a deafening shot rang out. I didn't even immediately understand what had happened. His partner, sitting in the car, had accidentally pulled the trigger. Seconds felt like hours as the cop realized what had happened. His face went pale, and in horror, he let go of me and rushed to his partner. I stood motionless, watching as panic took hold of him. He couldn't believe his partner was dead. I saw him frantically trying to call for backup, but his fingers couldn't dial the right number. At that moment, I realized that the situation was now entirely under my control. "Hand over the gun," I said coldly, and he, barely understanding what he was doing, obediently handed me the weapon. His eyes were filled with fear. He couldn't grasp how things had gone wrong so quickly. I approached him, looking him straight in the eyes, and offered him a deal. "Let me go, and no one will ever know what happened here." He nodded desperately, understanding he had no other choice. At that moment, I couldn't help but laugh. The absurdity of the situation, his fear, my confidence. It was all so ridiculous that it was impossible not to laugh. "You know," I said through my laughter, "I always thought that karma comes to those who deserve it. As you can see, I was right." I left him there, trembling and lost, knowing that today I had won this game. A game with no rules, only instincts, adrenaline, and the sweet taste of victory. After I outplayed fate last night, I thought it was all over. I believed I had regained control over my life. I even allowed myself to relax, savoring the victory I had claimed over that cop. I had won, and the feeling filled me with a sweet sense of satisfaction. But as is often the case, the illusion of safety was fleeting. The next night brought a new threat. I noticed him as soon as he appeared. In my rearview mirror, my pulse quickened immediately, and adrenaline surged through my veins. The same silhouette, the same cop, he was back. But why? Was it revenge? Or just a need to reassert himself? His motives didn't matter. All that mattered was that he was on my tail again. I knew he wouldn't just let this go. Maybe he thought I had gotten away too easily, or perhaps his ego was too bruised to forget our last encounter. But now, things had become more serious. I saw in his actions something more than just a desire for revenge. He wanted to ensure that I didn't just disappear, but that I disappeared for good. My emotions were a jumble: fear, anger, but most of all, determination. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. No, if he wanted a game, he would get one. My mind began to race, plans forming one after another. He thinks he's trapped me. I'll show him just how wrong he is. As soon as I realized his intentions, something almost mechanical clicked in my head. I suddenly felt sharper, faster, more cunning. If he wanted a chase, I'd give him one he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. I swerved sharply onto a side street, deliberately choosing one without surveillance cameras. He immediately turned on his siren. The chase was on. I could feel my car responding to every subtle movement of the steering wheel, perfectly navigating each turn. I knew these streets like the back of my hand. A turn, another, and then an alley. He didn't realize I was leading him into a trap. His desire to catch me made him blind to the obvious. The siren pierced the night silence, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, my eyes scanning the road, instantly assessing every possible threat. I felt like the hunter, despite appearing to be the prey. There it was, the turn into a small, dead-end alley, and I took it, knowing there was no way back. He followed, still confident in his victory. When I stopped, he stopped too. This was the moment of truth. He got out of his car, and his face showed he had something nasty in mind. His expression was full of determination, and he held his weapon confidently. I knew he wouldn't stop until he destroyed me. He approached, and I could feel cold rage boiling inside me. He thought it was over, but he didn't know that it was just beginning. He was only a few steps away from me when figures began to emerge from the adjacent alley. Vagrants, dirty and disheveled, with wild glints in their eyes. At first, I thought they were just random passers-by, but something about their behavior told me otherwise. They looked like ordinary vagrants, but there was something different, something terrifying about them. I didn't even have time to understand who they were or where they came from before they surrounded the cop. He froze, his face turning pale. He took a step back, but it was too late. The vagrants closed in quickly, like a pack of wolves, and suddenly pounced on him. The whole scene was absurdly surreal. They yanked off his cap. One of them put it on, and another grabbed his pants, like children playing pretend police. At some point, one of them pulled out an old, battered whistle and started mimicking a police siren. I just stood there, watching this absurd scene unfold before me. The cop screamed for help, his eyes filled with terror, but that didn't stop them. All I could do was watch, and at some point, I couldn't hold back. I burst out laughing. The entire absurdity of the situation his helplessness, the vagrants playing with him like a puppet. It was all so ridiculous that I couldn't help myself. Moral of the story: why bother with one when life itself is ruthlessly illogical? I walked out of the alley, leaving him screaming and thrashing in the hands of madmen. In that moment, I felt not just like a victor, but something more, like someone who controls this chaos. Every time I look at myself in the mirror, I see an actress. I've always admired the ability to change personas, to take on roles that would seem absurd in real life, but become my salvation. Today, I'm playing a role again, but this time, it's the modest girl who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've never been a good girl, but sometimes pretending to be one is pure pleasure. I see him again. The same cop who has crossed my path twice before. Now he looks worse than last time. His face is like a mask, white from exhaustion and despair. It seems like he's no longer among the living. He follows me, but doesn't dare to approach. Fear has become his constant companion. Maybe he hopes I won't notice his presence, that I'll just keep going. But I see his shadow around every corner. I'm amused by his despair, his attempts to find me among the crowd, his hesitation. He's like a cornered animal, about to make one last desperate move. I know he wants to end this madness once and for all, but he lacks the courage. He's scared, and that fills me with satisfaction. Perhaps it's time to play a new game? This time, I want to make it more elaborate, more refined. Invite him to dinner? Yes. Why not? The idea is so absurd that I can't help but smile. Should we play at being friends or something more? He's tired and worn out, likely to agree. He has nowhere else to go. I found him near an old cafe. His eyes were full of fatigue, but there was still a flicker of hatred in them. As soon as I approached, he froze, not knowing what to expect. I smiled, as if we were old friends, and suggested we have dinner together. He had no choice but to agree, though his face clearly read, "Why can't I just kill you right now?" The restaurant I chose perfectly matched my mood: white tablecloths, dim lighting, an endless sterility. A place where nothing happens, where everything is frozen in time. The perfect setting to shatter someone's illusions. We sat down at the table, and I began to play my part. I told him stories about how hard my life was, how I longed for a simple life. My words were so full of fabrications that I could barely keep myself from laughing. But he started to believe me. I saw how the tension in his eyes slowly faded, how his body began to relax. He finally thought he might be in control. "You know," I said with a smile, "sometimes all you need is peace. Let's drink to that." He raised his glass, and I noticed his hand tremble slightly. He still didn't fully trust me, but he had relaxed too much to consider the possible consequences. We drank. I watched as his expression gradually changed. First, a slight smile, then confusion, and finally, horror. He realized there was something more than just wine in the glass. His face turned pale, and his eyes widened in fear. He tried to say something, but his voice failed him. I sat across from him, enjoying every moment. He grabbed the table, his fingers clutching the edge of the tablecloth as if it could help him. But nothing could help him now. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. I just watched as he grew paler, his lips beginning to tremble in an attempt to form words. But no words came out, just a faint hissing sound. "Something wrong?" I asked with feigned concern, rising from my seat. "It seems you weren't quite ready for peace." He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. His body began to betray him, and I knew it was the end. I called an ambulance, but, of course, didn't mention what really happened. When they arrived, I stood by his body, which was already starting to lose consciousness. "It looks like he just overdid it with dinner," I told the paramedic with a slight smile. Maybe he was too nervous. You know how it is when you have too much on your mind. The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, and I stood there, thinking about how funny it would be if they concluded that he had simply overeaten. How many strange twists can life throw at you in one evening? Moral? Why bother when life is ruthlessly illogical anyway? When the ambulance drove away, I was left alone on the cold sidewalk, enjoying the night air. Sometimes, all it takes to realize that life is full of unexpected turns is one bad weekend. I smirked, remembering his terrified face, and walked away, leaving behind only the shadow of my presence. Sooner or later, life throws surprises at you, even for those used to keeping everything under control. I rarely had to think about the consequences of my actions. Usually, I just follow my instincts, reveling in the chaos I leave behind. But this time, it was different. I returned home, feeling a slight fatigue after another night spent seeking thrills. Nothing new, just the usual routine. But when I opened the mailbox, I found a note that immediately caught my attention. It was a message from that same cop. Yes, the one I had already left in complete confusion twice before. The note was brief, almost businesslike. He wanted to meet, to discuss what had happened between us, as if it was something significant, as if there was something real between us, something that could be discussed. The thought made me laugh. Maybe he truly believes I'm troubled by my actions, that I feel remorse? Or is he just cornered, trying to find some moral grounding? My thoughts mixed with emotions. A sense of triumph at once again controlling the situation, mingled with contempt for his naivety. He wanted a game. Perfect. I decided to accept his challenge, to play by his rules. But as always, with a few adjustments for my own madness, we agreed to meet at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The location was not chosen by chance. It was perfect for two souls lost in the darkness of their own thoughts. I arrived first, enjoying the cold wind seeping through the cracks in the walls. The warehouse had long been abandoned, and no one would come here by accident. We were alone. He arrived a few minutes later. I immediately noticed how much he had changed. Tired, worn out, he looked like a man whom life was slowly destroying, pushing further and further from the light. His eyes, once full of determination, were now empty and dim. "Hi," I began, not hiding my smirk. "You don't look so good." He remained silent, his hands slightly trembling. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was weak, almost powerless. I wanted to talk about what happened, about what's between us. Between us? I interrupted him, relishing his confusion. And what exactly is between us? Do you really believe any of this means something? He tensed but continued to speak. About forgiveness, about remorse, about needing to find a way out of this madness. I listened to him with growing laughter. His attempts to find meaning in chaos were so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh. "Do you really think I'm remorseful?" I asked when he finished his tirade. "That I want to make things right? You're pathetic." Apparently, that was the last straw for him. He suddenly drew his gun, pointing it at me. "Confess," he shouted, his voice full of despair. "Confess that it's all your fault. Confess that you regret it." I looked at him in disbelief. He really thought I would be scared. His hand was shaking, and his face contorted into a grotesque mask of hatred and fear. He expected me to start begging for mercy, to finally admit my guilt. But I wasn't about to play by his rules. "If you want me to confess," I said, slowly rising and stepping closer to him. "Then put the gun to my forehead. Go ahead. Do it." I took his hand, slowly guiding the gun to my forehead. He was in shock, his eyes widening in horror. He hadn't expected this reaction. He expected fear, tears, pleading words. But instead, I laughed in his face. "What's wrong?" I asked, smirking. "Are you scared?" "I'm not." He couldn't handle it. The gun slipped from his hand, and he backed away, as if I were some kind of monster. His face was twisted in terror. He couldn't believe what was happening. I picked up the gun, smiling like a child who had found a new toy. "You know what we could do?" I suggested. "Let's play Russian roulette." He remained silent, unable to utter a word, but I insisted. "It's simple. I spin the chamber, put the gun in my mouth, and pull the trigger. Easy. What could possibly go wrong?" I did exactly as I said. Silence. The gun was empty. I laughed. Sometimes life throws us such games that you start to wonder, maybe this whole world is just a bad joke, I said, looking at his exhausted face. He didn't respond. He was completely broken. I left him there in the warehouse, trembling and lost, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Sometimes I feel like I'm not just controlling my own life, but the lives of others as well. That feeling when you hold all the strings in your hands, when every step you take is part of a carefully orchestrated plan leading to inevitable chaos. But lately, I've noticed that someone is watching me again. He's back, the same cop. I can feel his eyes on me, watching every move with wary precision, trying not to give himself away. He's more cautious now. No more crude and straightforward attempts to catch me. No, he's acting with a strange subtlety, as if he's playing his own game alongside mine. In his eyes, I see something beyond a simple thirst for justice. There's obsession, a desire to catch me at something that will finally let him claim victory. But I'm not going to be his puppet. If he wants a game, he'll get one. But it will be my game, with my rules. I can feel the excitement bubbling up inside me. This hunt he's on is starting to amuse me. How far will he go? How much is he willing to lose just to find even one piece of evidence against me? I decide to do everything I can to break him completely. If he's so obsessed with me, then let him have what he wants. I'll start feeding him false clues, creating the illusion that I have a secret life, that I'm involved in something far bigger than he can imagine. Let his paranoia work against him. The first step is to create the illusion that I'm hiding something. I begin planting clues that will lead him down the wrong path. Documents appear in my apartment that seem to suggest secret deals. I leave photos of people he doesn't recognize in plain sight, hire decoys to accidentally cross his path, making them look like my accomplices. Every time he tries to follow me, I give him just enough evidence to push him further down the rabbit hole. He starts losing touch with reality, seeing conspiracies everywhere. He tries to catch me doing something significant, but I'm always one step ahead. His obsession begins to consume him. I see how he's becoming more nervous, how his mind is being taken over by manic ideas. He believes he's finally found what he's been looking for, that I'm about to reveal myself to him. But it's just the illusion that I've created. "Do you think you finally caught me?" I say to him in my thoughts, watching as he follows the false trail. But this is just the beginning. The game is only just starting. He's approaching the edge, the point of no return. I can feel that he's about to snap, that his patience is about to break, and that will be the moment of my victory. And now, that moment has arrived. I see him from my apartment window. He's sneaking up to my house with a group of other officers. It seems he's convinced he's found enough evidence for a raid. I sit in my chair, enjoying the last moments of peace before the game reaches its climax. He bursts into my apartment with a determination that borders on madness. His eyes are burning. He craves victory like a dying man craves water. But instead of answers, he finds only an empty stage. The entire apartment has been prepared just for him. All he finds is another trap, another deception that I have set up. When he finally realizes that he's fallen into my trap again, his face twists in despair. I step out of the shadows, like a ghost appearing at the most inopportune moment. "Oh, you tried so hard," I say, barely holding back laughter. "But still, no luck?" He can't believe what he's seeing. His hands are trembling, and I can sense that he's about to collapse to his knees in front of me. You do realize this is pointless, right? I continue, savoring every word. This whole hunt, all this tension, you're just trapping yourself. He doesn't respond. His face reflects the despair of a man who has lost everything. I watch as his mind crumbles, as the remnants of his sanity burn away in the fire of his obsession. Maybe it's time for a break, I suggest suddenly. I know a good doctor. He could help you find some peace. I think you might need a bit of psychiatric treatment. He reluctantly agrees, realizing he can't fight anymore. I leave, relishing the moment. This has all become absurd and merciless. I've won this game, and now all that's left is to watch him slowly fall to the very bottom. After everything I had done, I expected him to finally give up. I had played with him like a cat with a mouse, and each time he ended up losing. I knew his patience would run out eventually, but this time I was wrong. He didn't just come back. He had transformed into something more. Obsession consumed him from the inside, destroying what remained of his sanity. He was no longer a cop. He'd been dismissed for incompetence, but that didn't stop him. He became a stalker, a man living with a single purpose: to hunt me down. I can feel his presence everywhere. He no longer hides. On the contrary, he makes sure I know he's there. Threatening notes, strange symbols left at my door. He watches me day and night. I see his shadow on the walls, his reflection in windows. He follows me in the most unexpected places, like a ghost that cannot be shaken off. An ordinary person would probably be scared, but I'm not ordinary. Instead of fear, I feel excitement. We have a new game now. He's decided to become the hunter, but he doesn't realize that I'm always in control. I decide to let him think he's cornering me, that I'm his prey. But in this game, I make the rules, and the end will be just as I want it to be. He follows me everywhere, and I consciously lead him down a false trail. Every time I change my route, he notices. I pretend to hide, to be afraid of him. He sees me looking over my shoulder, checking to see if anyone is following me. I leave small clues for him, making him believe he's close to winning. One night, when I knew he was watching me, I decided to act. I deliberately led him on a convoluted route through the city, pretending to escape. But every time he started to lose sight of me, I gave him the chance to find the trail again. I watched as his obsession grew, as he became more and more convinced that I had finally cracked and was trying to flee. He got so caught up in his role as the hunter that he didn't notice when he became the prey. I led him to an abandoned construction site on the outskirts of the city, a place no one visits, a place that was perfect for the final act of our game. I knew he would follow me, and I was ready for the final showdown. When I stopped at the edge of a pit, he appeared behind me. His eyes burned with hatred, and he held a knife in his hand. I could see his hands shaking, his mind boiling with thoughts of revenge. He thought he had finally caught me. "Think you've got me now?" I said with a smirk, not turning to face him. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." His voice was tense, but there was confidence in it. "Really?" I turned to look at him, my eyes meeting his. In that moment, I saw everything. I saw how he had lost it all. His job, his family, his sanity, and it was all because of me. I stood before him, calm and confident, while he trembled with tension. He didn't realize that this was the end, not of my defeat, but of himself. He took a step toward me, raising the knife, but I was ready. At the last moment, I stepped aside and pushed him in the back. He lost his balance and fell into the pit. I heard his bones crunch as he hit the ground. Silence enveloped the place, broken only by his labored groans. I slowly climbed down to look at him. He lay at the bottom of the pit, his body twisted, but he was still breathing, though with difficulty. His eyes were filled with terror and pain, but the hatred was gone. He looked at me like I was the angel of death, come to claim him. Well then, I took out my phone and snapped a photo. When you follow someone for too long, you start seeing them everywhere. I knew this was the final act of our game. He would no longer be able to pursue me. His hunt was over. I uploaded the photo to an anonymous forum, captioning it with that phrase, and walked away, knowing no one would find him in time. It was the perfect ending, absurd and merciless. Like everything else in this life, I always considered myself a master of finales. Every game I started always ended the way I planned, but not this time. A week had passed since I left him at that construction site, and in that time, I had almost forgotten about his existence. I thought it was over, that the game was finished, and he was just another victim left somewhere in my past. But fate had other plans. It started with small things. A door left ajar, a phone ringing with no one on the other end. I felt a strange tension in the air, as if someone was watching me from the shadows. At first, I brushed it off, attributing it to my imagination. But these little occurrences started happening too often, and then it hit me. He wasn't dead. He hadn't given up. He had come back. My first reaction was a mix of surprise and irritation. How had he survived? Did someone save him? Or did he manage to escape on his own? But those questions quickly gave way to others. Now I knew he was coming for me. And while this situation should have frightened me, I felt something else instead. I felt a strange excitement. This long, drawn-out game had taken a new, unexpected turn. I began preparing for our final encounter. Everything had to end on my terms, the way I wanted. I left him clues, subtle but clear enough for him to find. This wasn't just a game of cat and mouse. This was the final act, and I would be the director. I didn't know how long it would take him to find me, but I was sure he would. I chose the place for our final meeting, an old bridge, abandoned and forgotten by everyone except us. It was the perfect place to bring our story to a close. When I saw him, he looked like a shadow of the man I once knew, wounded, exhausted, but still full of determination. His eyes were filled with madness and despair, but also a strange, terrifying resolve. He had gone through hell to reach this moment, and I knew he was ready to do anything to finish what he had started. I've been waiting for this. His voice was weak, but firm. I knew you wouldn't leave me alone. I never leave my games unfinished, I replied, standing at the edge of the bridge. But you know, sometimes I think this whole game wasn't worth it. He took a step toward me, and I saw his body tense, preparing for one final leap. In that moment, I offered him a choice that would be the culmination of our game. You have a choice, I said, looking him straight in the eyes. Either you jump and end this, or we both go down together. His face froze for a moment. Then he started to laugh. The laughter was eerie, mad, but there was something freeing in it too. Death is too easy, I said as he stepped forward. It's better to stay alive and keep living this nightmare. He took another step forward, ready to jump. But at the last moment, I unexpectedly stopped him. I pushed him back, and he stopped, looking at me with hatred and disgust. You don't want this to end? His voice trembled, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. No, I replied, smiling coldly. Death is too simple. I want you to keep living with this. I want you to feel this nightmare every day. His face twisted with pain and hatred, but he couldn't do anything. In that moment, I shoved him off the bridge. He fell, but it wasn't a quick, liberating fall. It was a descent into the void, into the abyss I had driven him to. As I walked away, I knew this act was the final one. He was already dead inside, and that was a much more satisfying ending. I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing the game was over, and that I had won once again. In that moment, I realized that the circle had closed, but not for him, for me.